we've been talking about this all morning long. President Trump has fired his administration's top election security official. Chris Krebs headed the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It was created after Russia interfered with the 2016 election. Krebs' agency went against President Trump's numerous claims of voter fraud, unfounded claims, and said that the 2020 election was in fact the most secure in American history. Lawmakers and officials on both sides of the aisle have publicly defended Krebs since his firing. So we want to bring in Virginia Democratic Senator Mark Warner now to comment a little bit about this. He is the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. So, Senator, Vlad and I were talking a little bit earlier about the fact that what Krebs did, and you called him an extraordinary public servant, what he did was, in the face of relentless attempts to influence our election from bad actors both outside of this country and inside of this country, very sophisticated attempts, he managed to pull off the most secure election this country has ever seen. That should get him a massive promotion, maybe a pay bump or something along those lines. Instead, it got him publicly fired via Twitter. What does the firing of Krebs mean for our election security and cybersecurity institutions going forward?
It means that Donald Trump is disrespectful of democratic free elections. After 2016, the Senate Intelligence Committee looked at all the ways Russia intervened. We put out a series of reports to try to say how we can protect our election machinery, how we can step up against misuse of social media, how we can stop Russia, Iran, and others from intruding into our elections. Chris Krebs took on that task, and by all accounts, both from inside the government, from my Republican colleagues, from secretaries of state all across the country, as you just said, did a remarkable job by making sure that everyone who was concerned about election security, all the local election officials across the country stepped up their game. And for him doing his job and doing it in a way, and if we think back 30 days before the election, we thought that there might be much more foreign intervention. We thought there might be people with long guns showing up at polls. We thought there might be violence. For the most part, we have avoided all of that. A lot of that credit goes to Chris Krebs. And it is so amazingly disrespectful, anti-democratic, that Donald Trump would fire this guy for doing his job, go against the bipartisan support he has. And I've tried to have patience with my Republican colleagues that said, let Trump go through a few days of tantruming. Well, those few days are now turning into weeks. They are turning into actions that are destructive to our national security. We have the defense secretary fired. We've now got the guy who kept our election secure fired. My concern is what may happen to the CIA director, the FBI director. And if people of goodwill in both political parties, if our business leadership, if our law enforcement leadership doesn't step up and try to rein in these absolutely dangerous actions coming out of this guy bunkered into the White House, then the very basis of our system's at risk.
Senator Warner, Chris Krebs, he has tweeted subsequent to his termination, and in sort of a humorous, you have to laugh in case you cry, he tweeted, "In defending democracy, do or do not, there is no try," sort of quoting Yoda in response to a tweet from Mark Hamill of Star Wars fame. But, defending democracy, you talked about the elections officials across this country who, as Anne-Marie pointed out, in the midst of this pandemic that is engulfing the United States of America, delivered a safe election, a credible election. But I want you to also talk about the just sort of normal, everyday Americans who went in knowing that they were putting themselves at risk, their families at risk, to work. I mean, I saw them here in New York City, and I pointed this out on the air, that, when you walk into a polling station, you see all the people working there, and they look like your grandparents, or they look like your neighbors, and people that, you see on the street every day, your mailman, somebody who works at the supermarket. And they were doing this, they were volunteering to do this. At this point, with the screeds from the President of the United States on Twitter, Rudy Giuliani, and his attempts in court, which is getting shot down every single day, to try and influence the results of this election, doesn't it become sort of libelous on these individuals?
I think it is not only disrespectful to Chris Krebs and CISA, the organization he headed, but as you pointed out, literally the hundreds of thousands of Americans who work the polls in the midst of a pandemic, the unprecedented 160 million plus Americans, 170 million Americans who either by voting early, voting by mail, or voting in person said, this is our democracy. I mean, the remarkable thing is, with the pandemic, with the potential of foreign intervention, America came through with flying colors. Our system worked. People turned out in record numbers, in record numbers for both Donald Trump and obviously even higher record numbers for Joe Biden. We should be celebrating our democracy. Instead, we've got a sore loser who is not accepting the results, hunkered down in the White House, firing anyone who did their job and stood up for truth. And I just, again, appeal to people of goodwill in both political parties. Enough is enough. To kind of adhere to Donald Trump's tantrums when we are, in many ways, not only disrespecting the folks who protected our elections, but if this behavior continues and if we see other national security officials decapitated in these remaining weeks, as we saw yesterday, against the will of virtually every United States Senator, Democratic and Republican, this arbitrary effort to take down a troop level in Afghanistan, leaving our partners in Afghanistan out in the cold, not dissimilar to what happened to our partners in Syria, leaving NATO and the 30 nations who are fighting side by side with us for decades in Afghanistan, holding the bag. How much more before all of us, again, this has nothing to do with Democrat and Republican, all of us who care about our country, about democracy and our national security, say enough.
We use phrases like a temper tantrum and a sore loser, and I understand why. But, this is not a kid who lost a baseball game. This is the President of the United States, and as he continues to refuse to concede, he's not giving members of his administration the go-ahead to work with this transition team, and that has some pretty big implications. I want to ask you, what does it mean when it comes to intelligence and the intelligence community when the transition team can't get information that it needs to move forward?
In a few short weeks, President Biden and Vice President Harris will take the oath of office. If they, and luckily Senator Harris has served on the Intelligence Committee, Vice President Biden has been obviously Vice President for 8 years, they come with a great deal of experience. But the idea that they are not receiving the presidential daily briefs of what the bad guys around the world are doing is a threat to our national security. The fact that world leaders from all political stripes are calling, congratulating, and welcoming a President-elect Biden, and yet the individual who currently is hunkered down in the White House is not doing his duty. The fact that people are blindly, loyally following his personal orders rather than doing their duty at the GSA is something we should all be outraged about. In many ways, what we were concerned about before this election was misinformation and disinformation that would sow chaos. That was Vladimir Putin and Russia's intent in 2016. It was their intent in 2020. Unfortunately, we don't need to have foreign misinformation and disinformation. We have that spewing out of 1600 Pennsylvania.
Senator Warner, let me talk to you about the coronavirus and get your take on what we're seeing happening across the country. As you know, cases are surging. Your state of Virginia is no exception. Governor Ralph Northam announced some new restrictions in the state earlier this week. I've been talking about this because I think it's sort of important to note. The New York Times has an interactive website that shows the ranking of countries of new cases per capita this past week. North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Wyoming, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Montana, Illinois. Then Montenegro is the first time a foreign country appears on that list, followed then by Illinois, followed then by Kansas and Luxembourg. Congressman Jim Jordan, a Republican, tweeted this: "Today, your freedom to go to church, to go to work, to go to school, to have friends in your home, to leave your home, to dance at your daughter's wedding, to celebrate Christmas and Thanksgiving is being taken away by the government." I'm just trying to reconcile what we see happening across the country with a statement like that from a member of Congress. I mean, are you, as a member of the United States Senate, trying to take away our freedoms?
You know, we've always had kooky members of Congress. But what we've not had in the past under presidents of either party is when that kookiness is accentuated or originated it sometimes out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I mean, we live in the greatest country in the world. We live in the most advanced country in the world. We have the greatest healthcare system in the world. It is American companies in concert with other companies who are developing the vaccination that is so needed. The idea that we have turned, and this again, exacerbated by Mr. Trump, a public health crisis into an ability to do political posturing. You know, we're a better country and we are a better people than that. And how many more stories do we have to hear of people who follow the Donald Trump or some of these kooky members of Congress, lack of scientific guidance, and then have their family members get sick and say, "Oh my gosh, if we'd only known." The level of irresponsibility, we can't stop irresponsible, kooky members of Congress. What we can expect is the executive office of the president to follow the science and give Americans sound medical judgment. That will happen under Joe Biden, but how many Americans will get sick? How many Americans will die in these ensuing few months because we're not going to have good medical science advice coming out of the White House?
Before we let you go, I want to ask you about the two Senate runoff races in Georgia. They are crucial races. They will determine the balance of power in the Senate. There's a whole lot of attention and a whole lot of money being poured into these races. How confident are you that these races will be able to go forward without a hiccup, without influence or meddling? Just sort of your take on how crucial these races are moving forward.
Well, they are crucial, and it is up to the people of Georgia to make that decision. It worries me when the two incumbents are literally attacking the Georgia Secretary of State, a fellow Republican, for simply doing his job, for honoring the count of the people of Georgia when they chose Joe Biden. Now, I worry as well if you decapitate the part of our government that's supposed to protect our election machinery. And remember, Chris Krebs, who just got fired, was a Trump appointee. The senior leadership at that agency are all Trump appointees. The fact that they're doing their job and you decapitate that agency before you go into a special election, we all ought to be concerned. I mean, this again, if our enemies, Russia and Iran and others, want to sow chaos in our country, at the end of the day, undermining democracy so they can go to their people and say, look, democracy doesn't work in America. Our system in Russia is just as good. Well, one way to do that would be to, as the eyes of the nation, the world are upon Georgia, try to inappropriate activities or social media or interference with our election machinery. Thank goodness the Secretary of State seems to be doing his job. But the fact that you have elected officials trying to undermine his integrity, we ought to be concerned. And let me just, I know we're coming close to the end of this interview. There are so many people of goodwill in both political parties who are aghast at these actions coming out of the White House. I just hope and pray that more of us, because this is not a reflection of the Republican Party. This is a reflection of the individual at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue I urge and beg my colleagues on both sides, let's just step up for democracy and let the people of Georgia decide. Whoever wins, we're going to honor that, but let's make sure that election is clean and secure, the way the elections that just took place a couple weeks ago were across the country.
Senator Mark Warner, thank you, sir, as always, for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.